Hi everyone. It's been a while, so I thought I would try this again. I chose this time a book that my mother read to me when I was 10-ish. It's still one of my favorite young adult fantasy books, and I've only read it once since then, so this will be an interesting experience. Anyway, it's called Amy's Eyes. It's by Richard Kennedy. It is not available on ebook as far as I know, but we'll see how this goes. Book 1, Chapter 1. The dove says, "Coo, coo, what shall I do? I can scarce maintain 2. Pooh, pooh, says the wren, I have 10, and I keep them all like gentlemen." Amy's eyes were open. She lay in the basket, swinging to and fro, looking into the bright blue sky. She saw that it was beautiful, but she would never remember this day, because she was only a baby and not long out of the house. And now Amy was a poor baby, and she even had no house. She had no mother either, for her mother had fallen ill and died only yesterday. Of course Amy didn't know this, but Amy's father knew this, and he walked along the road, carrying Amy in the basket. His eyes were fixed in a stare, as if he were looking into the face of a great gray stone. The basket swayed to and fro, and Amy lay looking into the motherly blue sky. Next to Amy lay her twin brother, wrapped in a towel. A strange-looking child he was, not blond and creamy like Amy, but instead he had a broad, flat face, and his head came to a point on top. He had no hair at all, and his crusty brown complexion was covered all over with lines and ruts and bumps, all wrinkly and— What? Let us look more closely at this child. No, of course not. This was not a baby, but a loaf of bread. Amy had no brothers or sisters. Very soon she was going to be alone in the world entirely, with no father or mother to remember, nor any other relatives in the world, and no roots to her past. Yet someone else was also in the basket with Amy and the loaf of bread. He looked rather like a root. He was thin and gangly like a root, dressed in blue trousers and a nice-fitting blue jacket with gold trim and epaulets at the shoulders. He was a captain in the Navy, if you could tell by his uniform. And he was a doll, was this captain. He had brass buttons, 6 in front, 2 in back on the tail of his jacket. He wore a hat pointed in front and in back, trimmed with gold, not real gold, of course, but yellow yarn. His insignia was a patch of red silk on his hat. At his belt hung a sword, nicely carved out of a splinter of cedar. You could tell that this doll was meant for important things, that he had a future before him, a mission perhaps, an adventure at least. Yet he also was young. Amy's father, a tailor by trade, had just given the last stitch, bite, and knot to him on the day that Amy was born. And so, being just as young as Amy, he had not yet learned his manners. He lay sprawled at all angles across Amy and the loaf of bread, and the basket swung to and fro. It was a beautiful day in a poor land. Amy's father was walking toward the sea, for there was no work for a tailor in the country. Many others were also without work. And if you had no work, and you must save your pennies for bread and take up needle and thread yourself, why should a sleeve or a pair of trousers be so difficult to fashion, you say? And you are right. Poverty is a great teacher. But in a seaport town there might be work for a tailor. Amy's father remembered this again, nodding his head as he walked along. Surely the ships still sail. And a sailing ship needs sails, and what are sailors but tailoring done for the wind? A good tailor can sew a nice fit for the wind, tell you that. And then there's net-making, if the fish still swim. So what's a net but a large sort of embroidery stitch, or maybe crochet? So Amy's father was going to the sea. Perhaps, he thought, he might even be a tattoo artist. Tattoos are done with needles, after all, and needles are a tailor's tool. One night he had come home after an evening at a public house, singing, drinking, talking with his friends, and it had all of a sudden come upon him that the captain, then unfinished and with no clothes yet, could use a tattoo. It is an old urge among sailors to want a tattoo, and there is probably more to it than the vanity of being decorated. A tattoo is a token of memory and identity, It is some small comfort, after 4 months at sea, perhaps, to glance at the name of a loved one bordered around with flowers. Or in time of trial to remember the tattoo motto, "Death before dishonor." Or when a ship is sinking, to think on a graceful script that spells out "Mother." Or to contemplate in bitter moments the picture of a heart thrust through with a dagger. So Amy's father gave the captain a tattoo on his right forearm, and it looked like this. I don't know if you can see that. It pictured a needle and thread, and touched in red and blue ink gave indelible notice that this was not a mere sailor before the mast, but a doll to take high command upon the poop deck, a doll of some significance. Amy's father might have been a sailor rather than a tailor, had the choice been absolutely free to him. When he was young, he used to think about the sea, and in books with maps he would trace the tip of his finger across oceans, and follow the coasts of continents, and buffet a stormy way around Cape Horn, and visit peaceful South Sea islands in his mind. He wanted to be a sailor one day, yet things happened differently. Instead of going to sea, he became a tailor. But now, as he walked along, he smiled to think that he might go to the sea at last. And he noticed for the first time that the sky was clear and cloudless. It was only 30 miles to the sea. Amy's father walked faster, even now sniffing the air for the salt of the sea. He raised his face to the sky. High above, he saw some white birds flying toward the ocean. Amy was not going with him. Amy's father was going to leave her behind. When it was dark, he was going to set down the basket and walk away from it. Of course, he was going to set it down in a very good place, at the gate of St. Anne's Home for Girls. He planned to return and get her after he had a job, and perhaps another wife to be a mother for Amy. He thought he might return in a year's time. But here is the truth, and you shall know it now. Amy's father never returned. God only knows what happens to so many people who intend to return but never do. God only knows what might happen to a good country tailor in a seaport town without a wife to watch over him. There are temptations and dangers in such a place, and a wild chance lurking round about the lanes and alleys, such as seafaring men roam at all hours. Or perhaps it is the same wild chance that follows them from the sea, a stormy and haunting wind that blows always about their heads. Indeed, there might be a dozen reasons that Amy's father never came back for her, but not one of them was that he didn't love her more dearly than anything on earth. It was just dark when they reached St. Anne's Home for Girls. Amy's father sat down under a tree by the road across from the place. A path with trees alongside ran up to the broad stone stairs that entered a great stone building. An iron fence surrounded the place. A dog barked. On the upper floor, lights were lit, moving about in the hands of the ladies of St. Anne's. They were putting the children to bed. Amy's father could hear a steady undertone of children's voices, and now and then a squeal, a high scream, or shouting. Then there was the beat of a stick on wood, and all went silent immediately. It was quiet for a minute. Then the last moving light moved out, and it was dark upstairs at St. Anne's. The dog barked again. 15, maybe 20 minutes passed. Amy's father took a scrap of paper from his pocket. It was too dark to read, but he knew what it said. "This is Amy. I love her, and I will come back for her. I have gone to the sea. God bless you, Amy's father." He pinned the scrap of paper to the captain's chest and tucked Amy between the captain and the loaf of bread. He got up and walked across the roadway and up the path towards St. Anne's. The dog might be a bother, he thought. If it got to yowling, he would set the basket down outside the gate and run. Some lady would run out and see the matter of it, and she would find Amy. But a quiet getaway would be best. And as it happened, the dog was no problem at all. He was a large dog with long legs. He growled when Amy's father was at the gate, but he did not bark. This dog knew the smell of babies, and he knew that this strange man had some proper business with St. Anne's, and he had learned not to bark around babies and small children. Amy's father knelt at the gate. The dog regarded him closely. Putting his head down to his child, Amy's father said, "Goodbye, my dear," and kissed her. He touched the captain then and instructed him Take good care of her, Captain." Squeezing the sides of the basket together, he passed it through the iron gate. He then turned his face and walked down the path. He walked all that night toward the seaport town of New Liberty, and never came back for Amy. It was a warm night. Amy awoke now and then and looked at the stars. The big dog with the long legs knew his duty. When it was night time, it was his duty to guard the property of St. Anne's. Since the basket was inside the iron fence, it seemed to him that Amy was now the property of St. Anne's, so he guarded her. Now and again he looked into the basket to see that everything was all right. He sniffed about at Amy, the loaf of bread, and the captain. All seemed well to him. And this was an exceptional dog, for he did not eat the loaf of bread. He did lick it a bit, however. And that's the end of chapter 1. Hope you like it so far. Let me know if I should continue.